So we're delighted that we're going to be joined by Simon Raymonde. So Simon is a musician, record producer, and mixer. He's probably best known as the bass guitarist and the keys player with the Cocteau Twins from 1983 to 1997. He now runs Bella Union record label. He's going to be interviewed today by LCM's very own Dr. Lucy O Brien. Lucy is the acting course leader for the Master's course in Music Industry Management and Artist Development. Lucy is an academic, writer and broadcaster, having enjoyed a prolific and continuing to enjoy a prolific career as a writer, having written for The Guardian, The Independent, NME, Q Magazine and Mojo, amongst others. She's also published biographies on Dusty Springfield, Annie Lennox and Madonna. I can see them appeared on the screen, but I can't see their lovely faces, so I'm just waiting for their cameras and their mics to kick in. Hey, Simon.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, so nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. Hey, Lucy.
Hi. Hi.
Hey. I'm going to leave you guys to it. I'm going to disappear off the screen. Thank you both so much for your time and for being here today, and I look forward to catching up with you at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Simon. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be having this conversation with Simon. I was just talking to him earlier about when I was a student at Leeds University in the early 80s. I remember going to Leeds Warehouse, which then was a new club, and seeing this band who had such an amazing kind of shimmering, ethereal sound with Liz Fraser, a lead singer who sang in her own language, and with the guitars and the sort of layers of the noise. I remember me and my friends were like, who is this? And this was for us, like it was like a portal opening, you know, to a new world. And, and that was the Cocteau Twins. And the Cocteau Twins were basically the beginning of that real blossoming of dream pop and the dream pop sound and the post-punk. You know, you really added something to post-punk at that point. And we're also on the 4AD label, which when I was an aspiring music writer, and then I joined NME in the 80s, and we used to regularly feature 4AD bands, and that included obviously your good selves, you know, Cocteau Twins, and the Breeders, and Pixies, Throw Muses, Breeders, and then my good friends Lush, and then in the very early days there was Bauhaus, and then latterly St. Vincent's, so a really experimental label. But I want to go back, Simon, to maybe the beginning, because today, you know, thinking about the other speakers and you know, I just thought that was so interesting. Andrew Sheps there, really great event there. His conversation with Gary, that's so interesting. And it strikes me, and as well, listening to the alumni this morning, that so much of a career in the music industry is about a winding, meandering journey. You know, that's the nature of it. That's the nature of being a musician and being involved in music. And for myself as a writer, you know, similar kind of, you go with the music, you go where the music takes you, basically. That sounds quite romantic in a way, but maybe that's the way it is. So yes, Simon, I'd like to ask you about the beginning of your journey in music. You know, how did you get started, and what were your inspirations?
Well, hello everyone, and thank you, Lucy, for the introduction. And yes, you're right. A meandering journey it certainly has been. The start of it, well, we'll start with kind of punk, because I think that's the sort of catalyst for everything. Culturally, socially, politically, and musically, that sort of inspired me as an 18, well, actually no, as a 15-year-old when punk started. So the musician part probably started around about the same time. My brother, on my 15th birthday, there was a punk band called the Vibrators, back in 1976, and he was friends with Pat Collier, the bass player, and I think he swapped a guitar for a bass or something. So for my birthday, because he didn't want to play the bass, he gave me Pat Collier's bass. So this was around about the time Nevermind the Bollocks came out by the Sex Pistols. So I, zoomed up to my bedroom and plugged my new bass into my tape machine and sort of played along with the Sex Pistols album and learned all the bass lines incredibly quickly. And I thought, oh, okay, well that was easy. I guess I'm going to be a bass player then. So that was sort of my entry point. And then I joined a school band, and then being in London in 76 onwards, well, I mean, I can't really describe what was an incredible influence that was on my whole life. And I still sort of feel very inspired by that period. I know it's probably, what is it, almost 50 years ago, but it still inspires me to this day. Not so much the music of 1976, although that was the sort of the litmus, the catalyst for it all to blow up. I loved the music then, but I got tired of it pretty quickly. And then I got into this band. I started this band called The Drowning Craze, and my local record shop was Beggars Banquet Record Shop in South Kensington. I lived in Earl's Court in a bedsit with my best friend, and we used to go to punk gigs every single night. We saw Joy Division, Wire, the Buzzcocks, the Clash. We saw the most incredible period of music in London during that period, and obviously it was very inspiring to be in a band at that same time. Now, hanging about in that record shop, as I did pretty much every day, I got to know the people in the shop and also the people above the shop, who were 4AD Records and Situation 2 Records, which was another small independent subsidiary from that period. They had bands like The Associates and Gina Loves Jezebel, and some other cool bands. So anyway, my very first band, got signed to this small label, Situation 2, through my persistence in going in the shop and handing over demo tapes and stuff. So that was my entry point, and it really was obviously incredibly important in the road that I have since gone down. Pretty much everything that I still do now is from that moment of walking in that record shop. So punk obviously has a huge part to play in my story. Meeting the Cocteau Twins was in that record shop. Joining the band was from that meeting. Obviously became friends with them before I actually got invited to join the band, because they were already in existence. The Cocteau Twins had already been making music for a year or so before I met them. And yeah, being invited into that band to write and record with them and tour with them from 1983 onwards, yeah, it became a huge part of my life. Very, very significant indeed.
And when you say punk particularly was inspiring, what was it about that scene that inspired you and inspired your playing and your sonics, I guess, the way you developed your sound?
Well, musically, I loved the scene. I just was totally into that kind of music when I was 14, 15 years old. My favorite records were, Television, Patti Smith, all early Public Image stuff. I was just so into that kind of music. The stuff that maybe was a little left field of like the straightforward punk stuff, like the Pistols, I liked, obviously, because it got me into playing. But I was sort of more into the post-punk stuff, and the fact that it was a little off-kilter, I loved that. And I loved the social and the cultural side of it and political side of it. I was really into, anti-racism marches and the whole clash of cultures between punk and reggae. I absolutely loved. I became massively into reggae and dub music at quite a young age. I worked in, I started working in the Beggars Banquet record shop soon after I signed with that label, and I worked there for a couple of years. And then when the shop shut down around 82, something like that, I then went and worked in a reggae shop, because my knowledge of reggae at quite a young age had sort of been developed through the punk scene and living in Shepherd's Bush. And once I moved out of Wales, I moved to Shepherd's Bush, and that was a big reggae scene in West London. So yeah, I was influenced by everything. I just dove into the whole movement, you know, in every single possible way I could. It became my life. Music was everything, and here I am, and it still is.
It's interesting you talk about dub, because there's a real sense of, you know, you have a real sense of space as a producer, and do you think that's been influenced by dub?
Oh yeah.
Early.
Oh, that's. I'm glad you picked up on it, because it's not something that's so readily obvious from listening to Cocteau Twins. You know, my parts, my keyboards or piano playing or bass playing. Certainly on the early records, you'd have no inkling at all of that influence in me. But I think listening to maybe to more of the stuff that I do now with my current project, which we'll talk about some other time, you can absolutely hear it. And yeah. I mean, I've just done some remixes. One of my heroes, Adrian Sherwood, has remixed a couple of my new tunes. So yes, I think that is influenced. My bass playing is influenced by that scene, that style of music. Although it isn't very obvious. I'm really interested you pick up on it.
Yeah, so it's almost about listening, isn't it? Having a sense of space, where everything is in the space.
I think so. Yeah. Let's go back to a lot of the stuff that Andrew was talking about, which was, as you say, was really fascinating. I think when your students will be working on tracks and just even on their Ableton or Pro Tools or whatever they're working on, I think, you know, what's coming out the speakers, it's very exciting when you first start working on tunes, just to kind of layer and layer and layer, and throw more stuff at it. But I think what you need to do as you sort of develop your processes is learn what to leave out, and that whole thing of space. Space is almost like an instrument. That's something Brian Eno probably helped us all understand through his productions. Obviously, he went on to become one of the most celebrated producers in the world with his work with Coldplay and whatnot. But some of his earlier stuff, where he was working in the ambient world, the space in those, like there's a record he put out called Apollos and Atmospheres with Daniel, what's his name? I've completely lost it. His engineer, Daniel Lanois. It came out around about 1981 or 2, and is one of the most beautiful records ever. If you want to work out how to fit space into an album, listen to that. It'll be a very good lesson for you.
Another really interesting influence, you know, and it's funny because I met your father before I met you. So Simon's father was sadly, bless him, was Ivor Raymonde, a very famous 60s producer arranger who did a lot of work with Dusty Springfield, and I met him when I was researching my Dusty Springfield biography. She was this fantastic singer in mainly the 60s, but then she had a huge comeback in the 80s and 90s before she sadly died in 99. But I remember talking to him about his work with her, and he was a very, even then, I'm sure by the standards of the time, a very experimental producer and arranger, and he did those big orchestral arrangements with her. And he said, it quite amused me, he said, yeah, she was quite a hard case, you know, she wasn't like the other female artists at the time. She really, really knew what she wanted and held out for that. And I got the sense that your father was a real strong personality. I mean, what did you learn from him in terms of music or your approach to the music business?
Yeah, that's it's a big question, and it's not easily answered briefly. So I'll kind of find the kind of headline points. I think obviously having a father that brilliant and that talented was amazing, you know, to sort of have the music around the house and just see how important it was in his life, and also to see have somebody, you know, you looked up to, who would, instead of, you know, forcing you into doing something you didn't really want to do, which sometimes happens with parents and their kids. He was very much kind of, look, if you want to be a dustman, if that's what floats your boat and you really love it, then you have to be a dustman. You know, if you want to make music and that's your passion, you have to go that way, and don't worry about whether it's sort of the done thing, or whether you know, you feel it's a good career or not. You just follow your nose, follow your passion. So that was obviously an amazing thing to be told from a very young age. I remember him telling me that. So that was beautiful. As far as his music goes, I mean, I don't know whether it's just because sometimes when you're a sort of a teenager, you just want to go completely the other way to what your parents want you to go, or so I just made my own path, really, and didn't really use him as a barometer for anything. I wasn't really listening to what he was doing. I knew he'd written "I Only Want to Be With You," and I knew of the big successes, but I wasn't really that interested in it. Maybe because I was a snotty-nosed punk that just was, you know, more interested in my own selfish pursuits, rather than, you know, admiring what he'd done. So that's a bit of a regret in a way, because he died very young. You know, he died when he was just literally 60 years old, and I was about to get married and have my first kid, and all of a sudden he wasn't there anymore, and I hadn't really developed my relationship with him on a musical level. He knew the Cocteau Twins, he understood it, he found it interesting, and I know he was proud of me, you know, as a father would be of a son who was doing what he wanted to do. But certainly my appreciation of Ivor Raymonde as a musician has been a lesson for me, a life learner from that period onwards. And I've dedicated quite a lot of the last 10 or 12 years to delving into his whole career. And I have my own label, so I'm very lucky that I can be selfish, and I've just released 2 double albums of his work over the last couple of years on my label. So anyone that wants to dip into those to see the breadth and scale of people he worked with, it's insane. I mean, I'm still surprised by it today. I still discover things I didn't know about him, and the quality of his work and the people that he worked with, like Joe Meek, who was an incredible, inspirational producer in the early days of pop music in the UK. He was kind of like the British Phil Spector, if you like, and my dad was his favorite arranger. So my dad would be at his little flat in West Hampstead quite often doing sessions. If you guys can imagine for a second that most of the music business is in Soho in the 60s, and all the studios are, you know, along the South Bank or in Soho somewhere, like Decca and CBS and Philips and whatnot. And my dad, of course, populated those studios a lot. But on the other side, there's this strange man called Joe Meek, who's making #1 hit records in his bedroom. You know, people are doing that now because technology allows it to, but this guy was doing it in the 60s, and that's pretty remarkable. And to have a father who was, you know, working with him pretty much every week, it blows my mind.
Yeah, very creative. I mean, the 60s, you know, that was such a pioneering time in terms of production, wasn't it? And you mentioned Phil Spector there, and also Scott Walker, who you his records have that really innovative sound there. I just wanted to go back now to the Cocteau Twins and kind of ask you, I mean, the band was together all in all, you know, 1979 to 97. So, gosh, you know, 18 years, and you were there for most of that time. So what was it like? I mean, you know, if we talk about band dynamics, how can a band survive long term like that? You know, releasing, I mean, you released over 8 albums, did numerous tours. What are the secrets for staying together over that time and staying creative?
Well, success definitely helps. I mean, having some, or at least a little bit of it. We were never like household names, but we were, I suppose, what you might call a cult band. And we, you know, I guess record sales these days are so minimal. It's hard to make comparisons. But you know, we did very well. We were, if you looked at the 80s and 90s and thought of like bands, I don't know, like the Smiths, New Order. You know, we're probably sort of a bit under that, you know, in terms of our place in the world, in terms of sales and stuff. But we were pretty well known, and yes, it was an incredible band to be part of. Musically, I can't fault it. You know, I think we made some really interesting records, a very unusual way of working, which I still kind of follow the way of working that I did then with the band today, and that is very much improvising. All the music was improvised, so we were always seeking our own studio. And so eventually, when we, you know, did around about 1985, 86, have our own studio and were able to make our own decisions rather than work with other producers and stuff. We basically, me and Robin, the other musician in the band, we would basically jam our songs out. I would play the bass or the piano and he would play his guitar, and we would come up with a tune very, very quickly within like half an hour or so, get a drum beat going. And then we would sort of build this track out of nothing, just layer it. And then sort of by the end of the day, hopefully have a finished instrumental. So with a full structure, so verse, an intro, a verse, chorus, verse, chorus, middle eight, chorus, however one would go with it. And then we would come in the next day and get on with the next one. And we would build up around about 10 instrumentals. And then at the end, Elizabeth, the vocalist and lyricist of the band, she would come in and pick one of them to sing on, and she would go in and pretty much do the same as we did, sort of improvise her vocals on top of the music. Very unusual way of working. But because I was so young and I hadn't really, done too much band work prior to my first ever band, I thought this was quite normal. And it was only, you know, really meeting bands much later on in life that I realized that way of writing and composition is quite strange. But I still follow it now. I love it. I think it's a brilliant way to work. And my current project, Lost Horizons, is very much me making up music and then sending it to singers to improvise their thing on top. So it is really good fun. And definitely if you're in a band where you write in a more traditional way, like with a guitar or keyboard or whatever, and sing along and get the melodies and put the lyrics, it might be fun to try this way as a bit of an experiment, because some of you will be familiar with a band called Porridge Radio, Mercury Prize nominated last year. I did a track with them, and they'd never considered doing a vocal in that way before, and turned out, you know, really, really well. And Dana, the singer, she absolutely loved it. So as a sort of experiment, you maybe want to give that a try at some point. But yes, as a band touring around the world for 10, 15 years, very, very unusual life. Lots of ups and downs. How do you keep a band together? Well, that's $1 million question right there, isn't it?
I guess you need a good tour manager.
Yeah, you need a good tour manager, and you need to kind of like love what you do. And that's really the key to it, because you've got to like the people you're in the band with up to a point. I mean, you probably spend more time with your bandmates than you do with your family and best friends, your partners. So you've got to get on with them. But of course, life does throw up lots of curveballs along the way, and you've got to be able to ride the good times with the bad times, because there are going to be plenty of bad times. And I think the secret to having a successful music career is not to get derailed by the times when it doesn't go well, because 100% it won't go well all the time. In fact, it might not go well a whole load of the time. But if you absolutely love what you do and you're resilient and you don't take it all too personal. I think that's another key to it. It's not to be too sensitive. Try and build up a bit of a shell and understand that these knocks are good for you. They are, you know. I've learned so much more in my life about the things that went wrong rather than the things that went right. And look at it like you would your own relationships. You know, man, when you meet your first girlfriend or boyfriend or partner, you know, you think it's going to be amazing, and sometimes very quickly it burns out and it doesn't seem so good. But what do? You pick yourself up, you dust yourself down, and then you find yourself in another relationship with someone, and you learn from the why you didn't get the first one quite right, and so it progresses through life till you find the partner you do want to spend time with. And bands are a bit like that.
Definitely. I you know, you talking about that makes me think, because I've worked recently with Skin from Skunk Anansie, and she was talking about, you know, with the band, they split up at the height of their success. Why? It almost seems whimsical now, because they weren't getting on very well and they were tired and they'd be doing lots of touring. And she says now she regrets it that they actually split. She said they should have just had a break. Gone and done a couple of solo things and come back. I mean, they did reunite, but it was after a long period of time, because it's like you say, it's a relationship. You have to keep the trust there and build on that trust. And she was saying it's like a family, you know, and the songs are like the children.
Well, that's very true. They are. I mean, perhaps ironically, on the flip side of that is, you know, I wonder if maybe we should have split up earlier than we did, because the other two in the group of three were, for a lot of the time, a couple, and they had a child. And then when they broke up in 92, 3, we carried on. And it was painful, you know, for them and for me, touring in a bus for months and months and months in America. So I think my second son was born 2 weeks, and then I went on tour, and I don't think I saw him again until he was 1. You know, and that's not really healthy for relationships. So, you know, you're going to have ups and downs with this, but I think the music, if it really means that much to you, and it obviously did to us, it was actually the only thing that we all loved so much. We kept the band together, I'm pretty sure, because music was the one constant thing that we knew was we were good at. Yeah. Rubbish at everything else, but good at the music.
And then after Cocteau Twins, in the late 90s, when you went your separate ways, you didn't really, though, because you and Robin Guthrie set up Bella Union. Do you want to say a little bit about why you launched the label and the kind of philosophy of the label?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the idea of the Cocteau Twins having their own record label, in one sense, seems ludicrous, because we'd had such terrible relationships with our labels in the past that you know, we just sort of hated record labels. So the idea of having one seemed kind of bizarre. But I think the point of having our own meant that we didn't have to, you know, talk to other people, and we could just be autonomous about our decision making and just be very much in control of our own thing. So we set the label up to put out our next album. That was the whole point of Bella Union inception. It wasn't to put out other people's records at all. But literally a few months after starting Bella Union, Liz just, you know, she called up and just said she couldn't do it anymore, and didn't want to continue with the band. So, you know, we had this label and no band now, and a beautiful studio as well. You know, this gorgeous studio that was Pete Townsend from The Who's place in Richmond. So quite a strange time, obviously, because that's all I'd known for 14 years was this band, and all of a sudden not to have it was kind of like, well, wow, what am I going to do now? So yes, Robin and I did start the label together originally to put out Cocteau Twins records, but sort of quite quickly it was obvious that it wasn't his kind of thing at all, you know. Wasn't something that he was interested in pursuing really, in terms of signing bands and all that kind of stuff. But I quite enjoyed it. It gave me something to do, you know. It gave me a creative outlet, even though it wasn't making music myself. It was helping other bands get a kind of kickstart on their own careers, and maybe some of the mistakes I'd made as a human being, as a musician, signed to a major label, signed to an independent label. I had lots of experiences by now, and maybe those experiences would be useful to some of the kind of kids, and you know, young kids starting up with new bands, and so it's proved to be. And I'm now in my 24th year running Bella Union, so I've stuck at it quite well.
It keeps winning awards, doesn't it? Keeps winning the Best Independent Label Award at the Music Week Awards.
We've done well. We've done well. You know, I can't get away from that. I'm generally not sort of a follower of award ceremonies and who's winning this and that. But yeah, it is lovely to get a bit of recognition for the work that you put in. And 23 years is a long time doing something. Yes. And we've signed some incredible artists, and I'm privileged to work with them all, and still love it every day.
So I wanted to ask you about some of the artists that you've worked with. John Grant, for instance, his solo album Queen of Denmark was reviewed in Mojo as self-lacerating ballads and transcendent beauty. There you go. Do you want to say a bit about working with him? You know, and was there anything that you learned from your experience with the Cocteaus about how to work with a difficult artist? You know, because he was going through a lot at that point. You know, a lot of issues.
Absolutely, and that was a brilliant question, and you're absolutely nailed it on there, because working with someone like Elizabeth Fraser as a singer, we'll just talk about that side first, because great voices, John Grant and Elizabeth Fraser both, you know, you have to be able to, in the studio, when you're recording a singer for a track, you know, you have to sort of know roughly what to say, and know how to deal with a temperament that is maybe not conventional. And so obviously my work with the Cocteau Twins and Liz obviously helped me enormously in you know, the production side of recording artists like John Grant. So yes, you're absolutely right about that. John Grant is an incredible human being, and he's actually the first artist signed to Bella Union, curiously, even though John Grant as a solo artist didn't really materialize until 2010 with the album that you described there. He actually signed to the label in 1998 with his band The Czars, and so I you know, he's been one of my best friends for a long time, and I care about him enormously. But he's been through some awful times, and obviously drugs has played a huge part in his life. Addiction has, as it has in mine with the Cocteau Twins. So yes, again, my experiences from that and how to deal with it, how to deal with rehab and cleaning yourself up, and learning to sober up and become a better contributor to society or whatnot. Yes, I've been there and seen it and done it and bought the t-shirt, so I'm sure that does help some of the artists, and you know, that's all out there. This isn't revelations. This is stuff that people in all walks of life go through, but it is useful in my job to at least have that in the back pocket, so that should ever an issue crop up, you know, I can always be on hand just to sort of be there to help and encourage, and let them know that, you know, all is not lost.
Yes, I think that's a really interesting point, because you know, the music industry, when I started writing about it in the 80s, was quite an unforgiving industry, and it would abandon people quite happily, you know, people who had addiction or mental health issues, because it was much less understood, wasn't it? And
Yep.
people were seen as liabilities, or they'd have like a difficult reputation.
Yep.
You know, and Dusty Springfield went through the same thing in the 60s. You know, there's a lot more awareness now, isn't there, about continuing those working relationships with the difficult artists. And, you know, some of my students are management students who work with artists. Have you got any tips for working with artists who maybe do have mental health issues or addiction, but do have great talent?
Yes, of course, and it's a really important point, and I think today what is wonderful is that it's not difficult to talk about. It's not a taboo to talk about it. It doesn't need to be discussed, you know, in hushed tones. I think back then, as you say, it very much was. I mean, Cox Twins were definitely a band that suffered with that. You know, we were not popular with a lot of people because we said well, you know, we said what we thought about things, and sometimes said things that we shouldn't have said. Maybe we fell out with the BBC, for example, in when we appeared on the Old Grey Whistle Test in around about 84, 85, and after that event, we didn't get invited back onto any BBC show until about 10 years later. So the way you come across to other people is incredibly important. As a musician, as a performer, you have to really check yourself. And maybe back then, you know, we didn't have anyone to advise us. We had no manager from the beginning right through till around about 1993. So there was probably 10, 12 years where we were doing all this stuff ourselves with no one to say, hey, hold on a minute, don't wind these people up, you know, just chill out, you know, blah, 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 blah. No one to give us any advice. We were just stumbling around in the dark, letting off fireworks and creating mayhem everywhere. So I think now, you know, having managers out there who can advise bands and just quietly help guide them on their way. And I think with the mental health problems that a lot of people are having right now, I think it's really important just to listen, not be judgmental, because everyone's problems and everyone's backgrounds are completely different, and you just need to listen and absorb the information that you're getting and just be there for them in as reassuring way as possible. And people are still going to make mistakes and trip up along the way. That's part of the learning curve, isn't it?
And you've had experience not just as a label owner and producer, but you've also done management as well. Is it quite confusing though sometimes wearing different hats? You know, how do you know, because a lot of the discussions today have been about that flexibility, but sometimes it must be quite dizzying.
I work with a young band right now called Penelope Isles, who are extraordinary and definitely on their way to being one of the best British bands out there. And they're all in their 20s and, you know, still loving life and experiencing things and falling in love and out of love. And watching them and being so close with them as I am, yes, there they are. It is a beautiful experience, and so I don't find it difficult to change hats, because I actually keep the same kind of moral standpoint, whatever conversation I'm having. I always look at things from the artist's point of view, because actually I look at myself as an artist first, not a record label. So even when I'm in label meetings with other label people, I'm still looking at everything from the artist's point of view, because that's my natural default position. So it makes for some tense conversations sometimes within the industry, because I'll sometimes say things that I just feel really passionate about, need saying, and sometimes, you know, you can ruffle a few feathers by that. But I think it's always important, from me anyway, to get out what I'm feeling, and in as honest and as an authentic way as possible. And the whole thing is all about being honest with your artists. And if things are bad and the tracks are sounding terrible, there's no point lying and just saying, "Oh no, it sounds amazing." Because a lot of managers in the past I've known have just sort of blow smoke up their artists' backsides and tell them how wonderful everything is. And sometimes they're not really as productive as being honest. You don't have to be mean. You don't have to say this is the worst thing I've ever heard, because it obviously isn't. But you can help them understand that there are maybe alternatives to this particular route that you're going. And I think that's what I prefer in my label and in my management style, is just to tell it how it is. Because I think ultimately artists appreciate that. And I think as a management technique, that's my style. I'm not saying it's everyone's. I hope it isn't, because we need as many different styles as possible.
I think that's a really interesting point. Approaching everything first and foremost as the artist that you are, rather than thinking, oh, right, now I'm going to play the role of the manager, or now I'm going to play the role of the producer. It's approaching everything from your personal point of view, aesthetically as an artist, and also emotionally as an artist. And then I guess there's continuity, isn't there, in whatever decision you make?
There is. And also, I mean, when I'm explaining something to an artist, I will say, look, I totally understand why you would think that, because I would think exactly the same thing. And they know I'm being authentic because they know I'm an artist, because they're aware of my past. So it gives me an authenticity to what I'm saying, because then I can always say, look, even though I understand what you're saying, I actually think this labeled perspective is the right one, and I give my reasons for that by sitting on the side of the label.
Yes.
But I'll always do it honestly. And I mean, if ultimately I think the position is best that they are in and they want to pursue it, even though I might not 100% agree with it, I will follow that on. I will say, you know what I mean? I don't have a massive opinion about it one way or the other, but I'm going to trust you with it, and let's go there. Whereas a purely label person might tut and say, well, I don't think you should. I mean, I've had that with Universal Records when the Cocteau Twins signed to Universal back in the 90s. We left 4AD. People will often ask, why did you leave 4AD? And it seems a very strange decision for a very independent-minded band. But actually, it seemed like the only thing we could do, because the dissolution of the relationship with 4AD, the independent label, had been very acrimonious and sad, because they were actually friends, and it ended so terribly. The reason we signed to a major label was to actually just have a relationship that was purely business, to get away from this thing where you're mates with the people you work with. And for about 10 minutes, we thought that was an absolutely brilliant idea. And it should just be about getting some money off them, let them give us the money, and then we can go off and do our own thing and be in control of what we do. And of course, it doesn't work like that at all. Very naive, stupid mistake to make. And of course, the conversations with the major label at that period were baffling to me, because they could not see our perspective at all. Could not see it, and it didn't matter how rational your explanation would be. I mean, they came to us and said they wanted this track to be a single, and we were like, no, it absolutely shouldn't be. It should be this track, because it's so different to everything else that's being played on the radio at the moment. It's a ballad. It's really slow. It'll really stick out. It'll really shine, because there's nothing else like that. And they just got so upset by our feeling about it. They went along with it because they kind of had to, because the contract said so. But it ruined the relationship. Right. And it meant that basically from that day forward, we were not a priority anymore. We went from being priority number one to, we'll take their call if there really is nothing else going on that day. So, I think management can really, really help you negotiate some of those tricky moments where you really shouldn't be talking to these people directly anyway. It should all be done through management, because management should be your voice.
Yes, and communicating being the link, the link between the artist and the record company.
Very much so.
thinking about Bella Union, I mean, it's such a great space you've opened up there for artists, and I'm thinking particularly because that's a specialist area of mine is female artists. Is, you know, you've got Emmy the Great, you've got Mickey Berenyi who was in Lush, who's with Piroshka, Laura Veers, some really great women who go against the grain and aren't typical pop stars. Was that something you consciously wanted to create, somewhere where female artists could really express themselves?
No, I think it is very subconscious. I'd never really thought about it until sort of, you know, 10 or 12 years into the label, and you know, I sort of suddenly noticed how we were going on the gender split, and it seemed to be exactly 50-50, which I thought was very interesting. And it still is today. I think we work with around about 75 artists right now, and it's weirdly exactly 50-50 split. And there is never was any kind of like thought process behind that. I think probably working with someone like Liz, and having a very strong mother in my life, Dusty Springfield being a huge part of my life, kind of through my dad. Patti Smith being a huge influence on me, Susie and the Banshees, X-Ray Specs, a lot of the kind of best punk bands. The Slits were probably one of my favorite bands of all time, you know, all girl band, well, apart from the drummer. So, you know, I think the sort of female influence in my life has been massive, and I've always, you know, I probably like as a listener and a fan more female artists than I do male. And probably most of the male artists I like have more feminine attributes. I mean, I love, you know, someone like Tom York or Scott Walker, Billy McKenzie, you know, they kind of sing like girls. So I guess I'm just attracted to it. And we're a big part of the key initiative of gender splits. As a label, we only have, an equal split of staff, female and male, and as a label I'm very proud that we do as well.
Yes. and you know, I'm thinking Fleet Foxes, Clear Lake, there's a real sense of musicians being in touch with their male musicians, being in touch with their female side, and really expressing that in a way that's really creative. Or Flaming Lips, Mercury Rev, etc. You know, you really get that in that sort of dream pop or psychedelic sound too.
Yeah, you know, I guess when I'm doing talks like this, I sort of go, oh, I hear it and I think, oh yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm so not thinking about these things when I sign a band. My inspiration for signing a band is really just based on that, like, oh my God moment. You know, certainly a band like Flaming Lips and Mercury Rev is different because they are older bands that have been around for quite a while, and I've been a huge fan of them, and I'm of course massively excited to work with them. Spiritualize the same. When I work with a brand new band, you know, whether it be signing Fleet Foxes at the very beginning or signing Pompoko, a Norwegian punk band, it's got to be about the kind of wow factor and how does it make me feel. You know, it's all about the physical and the spiritual and the emotional connection that I have with music. Because yes, I can listen to a pop song and appreciate it for its catchy tune, its melody, a lyric, whatever, and I can appreciate it as, you know, I appreciate it in the sense of what it is. But do I like it? Do I like pop music? No, I don't have any emotional connection to it really. But the kind of music that I work with on the label side, it's all about what gets me going, and that does still regularly, every day, still get me going. When I hear a new piece of music by a new artist, I'm still excited to go and discover something on Bandcamp or SoundCloud or listen to a demo or whatever. I haven't got to the point yet, even in my advanced years, where I'm just bored of it, which I kind of keep imagining I'm going to get bored of it at some point, because it's strange to still be as excited about it as I am at my age, but I am. And that's the truth. And I still seek it out and drink it in. It keeps me going.
So if we've got any, budding dream pop artists or artists,
They don't have to be dream pop.
no, exactly. Yeah, what are you looking for?
Well, that's the thing is, I'm not looking for anything. I'm really not. In fact, I send more emails out every day saying, thank you for sending this, but I'm really not looking for anything. I'm happy to receive it, but I'm not actively looking. So that's the kind of key difference between the two things. I don't know what it is I want until I hear it. And that's the excitement part. And that's a bit like what I do in music. I don't know what song I'm going to write today until I start writing it. It's all about improvising, and the signing of a band is all about the guts. It's all about instinct. It's about what hits you and makes you go, what the F was that? And then you dig into it and you listen to it more and go, oh my God, this is amazing. Now that in itself does not mean we're going to end up working with a band, because me being blown away by something is actually quite a regular occurrence. It happens, several times a week. To get to the point where I would actually sign a band is now much more complex and different than it was probably 10 years ago. Possibly because of the way the industry has gone, but also probably based on experience where maybe it hasn't gone quite as well as I would like to have done, because I didn't quite have these checkpoints in place first. So now I kind of like contact the band, tell them how much I love their music, try and engage in a conversation with them and see what kind of people they are, because there's only 4 or 5 of us at Bella Union. We're a very, very small team. It's like everyone that works there is like my family, right? So these people have been there for a long time, and we all care about what we do enormously. So to sign a band where they don't really get what we're doing, and they're not the kind of people that we would get along with, then we probably, no matter how good they were, we probably wouldn't sign them. Well, we definitely wouldn't sign them, because it's all about the relationship, because it's actually the relationship that's the most fun and the most important part. Because finding great music is as easy as turning the tap on, for me. And I don't mean that in a conceited way at all. I just mean I'm very excited about hearing new music all the time. So when I do hear it, quite often I'm like, oh, what's that? But to get to the point where you actually think, oh, I'd like to help these people, and I think they would actually really appreciate my help, and it could be a really nice back and forth, and this relationship could actually go somewhere. That's what excites me, not just the music, although it is, of course, the music that is the start of that conversation.
And so it's something that is nurtured and then gradually develops.
Yes, and it might take 10 minutes to get to the point where it's fantastic and exciting, or it might take 10 years. You have to give things some time. Not everyone is going to be on the same timeline of growth in terms of, I might recognize talent in an artist at the beginning. I have done in plenty of occasions where I thought they were going to be amazing, and it's taken either not happened at all, or it's just taken much, much longer than I might have thought. So you just have to let people make their own progress. Sometimes it's just going to be super steady. Beach House is a perfect example. Beach House didn't really attain much sort of global success really until their 3rd, even their 4th album. And we stuck with them all that time, and they stuck with us all that time. And it was a gradual process. Sometimes they would do well in the States, but not do so well here. And, they could clearly have been wondering what the hell was going on and why they weren't selling more records here. But, you just have to be patient and just say, okay, look, we're just going to keep pushing on. Things are moving. They might be slow, but they are moving. And then all of a sudden, the 3rd album, Teen Dream, came out, and we went from selling just a couple of thousand records to 20. And then you're like, oh, okay, there's definitely something happening here. And that very slow growth curve suddenly started heading upwards. And obviously from there on in, they are just one of the most important bands on the label. And an extraordinary couple, 7 albums in with them now. So that's another thing, is I love the longevity of building these relationships. I don't want to just sign a band for one album and have them go off and sign with Universal, because I know that doesn't work.
That's so refreshing to hear, isn't it? Because so much of the music industry, certainly major labels, are about, you know, we need to make a profit like now, you know.
Yeah,
So
well, I don't care about that stuff at all. I don't even look at the sales. I never look at the streaming numbers. I don't look at Facebook likes. I don't look at tweet numbers and nothing. I'm just not interested in it. I'm only interested in the tunes and the people, because the tunes and the people is what it's all about. All that other stuff will either happen or it won't happen.
brilliant. I think that's great. Thank you, Simon. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Lucy.
I'm aware, do we have some questions?
We do have some questions, Simon, if that's okay, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple. So we've had a couple of questions, one from Jasmine, one from Kin, fundamentally asking, how was it working with Fei Wong in the 90s?
It was very strange. Yeah, it was a lovely experience. Obviously, for those who don't know, Fei Wong is a Mandarin singer, and she was in a movie called Chungking Express in the early 90s, and was an actress and starting to do really, really well. And we just signed this deal with Universal. I think she was on Universal in Asia, and we got an email asking if whether, what was the original mail, I think was whether she could sing on our album, and we thought it was quite weird. But then we sort of heard her stuff and realized that, you know, she was very influenced by our music. And actually, you know, what we ended up doing was, on the Asian release of the album, she put some backing vocals on the album Milk and Kisses. So yeah, it was a strange thing because we never actually met her, but actually the relationship musically was really fun, and me and Robin actually ended up writing some music for her subsequent releases after her next album. So yeah, it was a relationship that actually developed from something quite odd and strange into something quite cool.
That is cool. We've had a question in from Camille that says, hi Simon, hi Lucy. What is the number one advice, Simon, that you would give to a manager who's looking to get their band signed?
Well, I think, you know, there's a few things. The number one thing I would say is be humble in every aspect. As an artist, as a manager, I think, you know, you've got to start from a viewpoint of not just going in there and saying, this is the greatest band ever, because, you know, sometimes I get these mails from managers, and it just blow the whole thing up so big that it just seems so unlikely that the band could ever be at that point. That's this early in their career. So I think, you know, you've got to start from a humble point of view. And I think in terms of approaching record labels, make sure you do your research, because I do get an awful lot of emails from artists and managers where when I finish reading it, I think, have you looked at the roster? Have you looked at the kind of things that I like and the kind of bands that I sign? That's not to say I'm not interested in all sorts of, I mean, I've released noise records, punk records, classical records, soundtracks, metal things. I've released a lot of strange records. So I'm not saying, you know, Battle Union is just this, but I think you really need to do your research and make sure that the labels you're going to approach are at least going to give you a fair crack at the whip and listen, because otherwise you're just kind of wasting time, aren't you? You know, it's the same with bands when they say, you know, what producer should I get? Well, you know, what are your favorite records and what bands do you like and what producers are they using? That's a pretty obvious place to start. Yeah. I think a lot of it is obvious, but sometimes people just need to be sort of directed calmly in the direction. And I'm always sort of shepherding people off to here and there who've come to me incorrectly, if you like. So I think that's the key to it. There is like, do your research and hone down maybe 3 or 4. You don't have to find 100 labels that you can send your band to. You only need 3 or 4. But if they're the 3 or 4 that are really likely to get back to you, and the other thing is perseverance, because I sometimes do need a second email and a third email.
Yeah.
Not kind of like, why haven't you got back to me yet? But you know, sorry to bother you again, you know, because I do get so many, it's really hard to keep on top of them all. I try, but sometimes a second mail, as long as it's nice and not pushy. And the other thing is, don't be pushy, because that's just going to put someone like me right off, you know, because I won't look at it as oh wow, they must be so keen. I'll just look at it as like, stop being annoying.
Yes. Totally. We've got time for one more quick question. And this is from Dele, and it says, is there a book of a person in the music industry that you have found interesting that you would recommend to be read?
A book?
Yeah.
Well, Lucy's book on Dusty Springfield is a great start. I tell you what, there's a Scott Walker book that I can't remember the author, but because I'm a massive Scott Walker fan, and I was very privileged to curate the BBC prom that they had Scott Walker. Wow. We had a few years ago. The book I bought on Scott Walker was absolutely dreadful, so I'm not going to recommend that one. Yeah, start with Lucy's book on Dusty. I think that's your best bet.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely, 100%. Simon, thank you so much for being here today.
Very welcome.
Thank you for your candor and your enthusiasm, and you know the way that you talk is motivating and inspiring. And thank you so much for being here today. And Lucy, thank you so much for hosting the session. And I know I've really enjoyed listening to it. And thank you for being here.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you.
Pleasure.
You very much, Lucy, for your insights, and good luck to all your students.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.